back to the channel. Today we are diving into the world of databases again and exploring store procedures. We will compare them to direct SQL statements and see why store procedures can be a game changer for your database efficiency and security. Now, we've done videos on store procedure before. So we've done a video on how to write a store procedure, and we've also done a video of comparison between store procedures, functions, and views. Now, if you want to know more about the store procedures, and also if you want to see a hands-on video of what's the difference between the store procedure, functions, and views, please click on the links on the screen to basically go and view those videos. Now, today's video is not a hands-on, it's more of a theoretical sessions. You'll probably see more of a PowerPoint slide rather than a SQL. But trust me, this is quite important when you're writing code and when you're interacting with your code from using your code to the database, and you'd see why store procedures are actually beneficial and also better compared to direct SQL. So let's dive into the first benefit now. So the first one is performance boost. So what do we mean by that? So store procedures are actually pre-compiled, meaning the database optimizes and stores the execution plan. Now, execution plan gives us a lot of detail about the individual statements within the store procedure. So this basically means you can actually investigate a slow performing store procedure, and you are able to use the information within the execution plan to tune the store procedure. And because database is optimizing and is actually storing the execution plan, now once you've have a fast execution plan, there's better chance for your queries or tasks within your store procedure to run quicker each time. So compared to that, direct SQL queries are compiled every time they run, which can cause overhead. Now, if you have a very simpler database and you're dealing with less amount of data on a daily basis, then possibly direct SQL still are okay to run. Now, but if you talk about complex queries or repetitive tasks, and also if you're working on large databases, store procedures are always better. Now, rather than having a confusion on, actually, maybe my application is simpler and we'll use a direct SQL. If you use the principle that it's always best to have store procedures, because you have a performance boost, and you'll also see other benefits. You'll find that actually, once you get into that habit of creating a store procedure, it's actually not that of an overhead to create a store procedure, and therefore you have that as a good practice for every scenario. So if we dive into the next one, so we get enhanced security. Now, store procedures are like objects on your database, like how you have your tables, your views, functions. Store procedures are objects. So you're able to allocate security on them through users and roles on the SQL server or your database, really. So they provide better security. You can create permissions specifically to execute store procedures, limiting direct table access. So this is quite important especially within a production environment where you don't want anyone going into the tables directly and modifying the table or even updating the data within the tables itself. So if everything is controlled through the store procedures, then you have less risk of data integrity problems if someone's trying to update data or remove data, etc. So this also helps prevent SQL injection attacks. So this is quite key, because if you look at direct SQL statements, from your front end, some data is passed into the back end, and that data essentially is then injected into the direct SQL statements. So there's a more risk of having a SQL injection attacks if you use direct SQL, whereas with store procedures, it's very unlikely that you're subjected to that attack. And also unauthorized data manipulation, which is quite key when you're especially working in a production environment. So yeah, so security is a good benefit to have. So the third benefit is improved maintainability. Now, centralizing SQL code and stored procedures simplifies maintenance updates, which is quite key, because if you have a direct SQL and if you have maybe multiple places within your application where you want to repeat the same sort of task, for example, if you're retrieving customer details, and instead of basically having the same query repeated in multiple places, if you have one stored procedure, all you need to do is just call that one stored procedure, and therefore it simplifies, having, reduces the code redundancy really, and therefore it's simpler, and it's also maintainable. So changes are made in one place, affecting all applications using the stored procedures. So you have traceability. So you're effectively changing it in one place, and therefore any changes that are made to that. With direct SQL, you'll need to modify code in multiple locations. So as I said earlier in the example I gave earlier, if you have multiple places that you have the same SQL statements written, if you edit it one place, you'll have to update all the other places as well, because for example, if you're adding a new column to the table, you don't necessarily want to update 5 places in the code where you can actually update only in one place in your stored procedure. So that's one benefit. And moving on to the fourth benefit, which is reusability and modularity. So it's similar to the previous benefit, but obviously, code reusability is a big topic in a development environment, and especially with developers. So obviously, as you work within the code, obviously code reusability and code modularity is quite key for having better maintainability of your application. The similar principle applies to your database as well. So stored procedures allow you to reuse code, and it also then allows you to create modular stored procedures for common tasks, and it improves code organization. So this obviously saves development time and effort. And then moving on to the next benefit, reduces network traffic. So with direct SQL, because you're having to write actual SQL statements and then pass those SQL statements to the database, from interaction point of view, you're basically sending more data from your code to the database, and therefore increasing the network traffic. But also stored procedures, all you need to do is just send the stored procedure name and then your parameters, and therefore you're obviously limiting the amount of network data being sent from your code to the SQL. And then better error handling. So stored procedures allow you to centralize error handling and consistent error messages. Now you can argue that for example, if there are 100 stored procedures within your database, and each stored procedure has sort of a central has an error handling of its own. Now this would be up to the individuals who are developing the application to sort of have that centralized error handling. So if you so more often than not, what would happen is, rather than having the actual error handling within the stored procedure itself, you might actually move the error handling into the into for example the code where you're calling to the database, because you might have like a centralized place where you call the database from, rather than having hundreds of places. So this can basically depend on the design of your application, but obviously having a stored procedure means, instead of having multiple places where you have direct SQL queries written, you have one place where you have a stored procedure written with that same SQL query, and therefore your stored procedure can essentially have error handling embedded within that stored procedure, and it would benefit from having a centralized error handling in that sense. Okay, so that's, I guess, one of the last benefits. Okay, to conclude here, then store procedures offer clear benefits over direct SQL queries, as you've seen. So they improve performance, security, maintainability, and code organization. I would strongly urge you to consider using them in your database applications for a more efficient and secure approach. Thank you, and have a pleasant day. Bye.